Um, really excited to be here. I appreciate the invite from the organizing committee, and I also realize you've been in sessions, many of you probably, for a long time today. So hopefully, even though it's the end of the day, and this is the point in time where we're looking forward to like, okay, what's happening afterwards? When do we get food? That I can share some things with you that will be helpful. I really love talking about experiences and experience design because this is a horizontal competency. When I teach in the executive MBA program at BYU, I know that I'm going to have folks in all different industries and job positions, and I know that they're going to be able to find takeaways from what we share because we all have experiences every day, right? And many of those are not intentionally designed, both in our professional and personal life. And so there's lots of elbow room to design experiences intentionally. And that's my hope today. If you've got like an open seat by you, will you just raise your hand for some folks coming in? Okay, we've got seats over here for folks. There's some more seats over here, and there's one back there. You can like run that other camera or something maybe. Okay, so as I often like to do when I start off by talking about experiences, start with cholera. Okay, so in 1854, there was a cholera outbreak in London. There had been multiple cholera outbreaks, but this one was particularly severe. And it was clustered primarily around the Soho neighborhood, if you're familiar at all with London. Now it's like sort of on the West End. But this was a real issue. People were dying and dying very quickly. It was causing a lot of people to leave the city, and there was just not really an awareness of why people were dying or really what was happening at all. And it's a great example of a wicked problem, right? If you're familiar with this idea of like wicked versus simple problems, not morally wicked, right? But just complex. There was a lot of stakeholders. It was impossible to just apply a known solution. People didn't know why they were dying, whether it was the stinky air or people were being immoral or whatever it was. It was just complex, and it was causing all the way up to the Queen and the government lots and lots of problems, right? Because people were fleeing the city, and there's a lot of uneasiness at the time. This guy, Dr. John Snow, he was an early innovator with anesthesia. And he was also sort of going against the grain when it came to trying to figure out what to do with this cholera outbreak, right? So the common assumption was this miasmus theory. So bad smelling air caused disease, right? Which I think is probably, like, I can see why this was such a common feeling because it was just stinky, right? In 1850s London, right? Most sewage was thrown out in the street, or they had sumps in the bottom of apartment buildings or flats that would then just sort of go into the Thames. It was summertime. It was just a stinky place. But he didn't agree with this. He thought that something else was going on, and he also was really interested in data and going to the source and trying to figure out what exactly was going on. And we're going to come back to Dr. John Snow and his story and see if I can tie cholera back into designing extraordinary experiences on the back end. But I bring it up to start off because designing experiences are also a wicked problem, right? It's not like we're designing something like a chair that's like this tangible object, right? We say the word experiences, and in English, we use it to mean multiple different things, right? I had an experience at work. I have work experience, right? Even though we're all sitting here in the same room having the same experience, we're all going to walk away telling different stories about the experience we have together, right? So it's this abstract thing in figuring out, even though we have experiences all day long every day, when you try to say what an experience is, it's pretty easy to end up in different places and different understandings of what that means. And to design something, I think we first have to define it. Okay, so that's sort of our goal today is to really look at experiences and try to break them down into their component parts, so that we can start thinking about, yeah, okay, what type of experiences in my realm, at my company, or even in my life do I want to think more intentionally about designing? And I'm going to give you some tools to think about experiences, but also how to to think about designing them. And for some of you, this is stuff that you've heard before. Others, there may be parts that are different, but my hope is that there's actionable things that you can take away from this conversation. And I want to frame it around this idea of experience intelligence, right? So experience intelligence is the ability to intentionally design and engage in experiences, okay? Because we are often playing both of those roles as the designer of an experience and as participants in experiences. And you know, just because you think you've designed a great customer experience or a family dinner experience or whatever it might be, people don't always engage with it the way you think they should or would or ought to, right? And so hopefully we give you some tools today. I see experience intelligence as consisting of 4 primary pillars. So the first is the experience paradigm, which we're going to talk about. It's just viewing the world through an experience lens. Second, experience design process, right? That there's an intentional, systematic process to design experiences. I'm talking about those 2 primarily, and we'll talk a little bit about experience design strategies. What are specific things that you can do? And then experiential competencies. Like, what are the competencies that people need to fully engage in experiences, okay? So we'll talk about some of these, and we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end. So let's talk about experience design paradigm first. Turn this just so I can see this a little bit better. Okay, so the overarching idea with experience paradigm is that experiences are everything and experiences matter, okay? So when we pay attention to something, we're having an experience, right? Although we're all having the same experience right now, if you are, you know, making dinner reservations or thinking about something else, even though you're looking up at me right now, you're having that experience that you're paying attention to, right? But through our experiences, it's how we sort of make sense of ourselves, people around us, the world. We gain information as we interact and have experiences. Experiences also matter, increasingly economically. Are any of you familiar with the work of Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore, The Experience Economy? Any hands? Okay, this will be sort of new. So Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore first published an article in Harvard Business Review in like the mid to late 1990s, right? And they made the argument at the time that we were going to see experiences play an increasingly predominant role in the economy, right? And in many ways, their argument at the time has been proven true. Their core sort of theory, the most recent version of their book came out like in 2019, and Joe's working on another book on the transformation economy right now. But the basic idea being that over time, we've had a progression of economic value, right? As consumers' needs have evolved, different industries have stepped in to meet those needs and drive the economy. So you have when we had a primarily agrarian economy, it was commodities, right? You'd grow corn and then you would sell the corn to somebody else. With the Industrial Revolution, goods started to be manufactured, and manufacturing drove the economy. Post-World War II, we see intangible goods, services, become a primary driver of the economy. And then Pine and Gilmore and others made the argument in the late 90s, early 2000s, that experiences were becoming a primary driver of the economy. One of the reasons why we see these progressions is because of commodification, right? At a certain point with manufacturing, you could start just making decisions, purchase decisions as a consumer based upon price, right? As everything became sort of equal, right? The internet commoditized a lot of services because I could get on and be like, okay, I can compare all of these car insurance services and decide which one is cheaper and make comparisons on price. And it's really hard to compete on price, right? And have that be a competitive strategy. So Pine and Gilmore argue that experiences, not only are they provide a competitive advantage because experiences are individually perceived and people on average are willing to pay more for experiences. So their example they usually include with this is if we think about, they're both big coffee drinkers. Joe and Jim both love fine coffee, and so their examples around coffee beans as a commodity. You pay a certain amount for raw coffee beans. You pay a little bit more for coffee beans that have been ground into coffee grinds or coffee grounds. And then you pay a little bit more for a cup of coffee, say at a cafe or McDonald's. And then you pay a premium for sort of a full immersive coffee experience. This is what Starbucks sort of built its reputation on. And then there's other variations of that. And the differentiation between services and experiences is around time, right? So services are time well saved. I'm paying somebody to do something for me so I can do something else with my time, whereas experiences are time well spent, right? So I'm paying money to do something with my time. And Joe and Jim argue that all companies should think about ways to have people pay for the time they spend with them, right? Like a price of admission. They often talk about the money value of time, right? So you can sort of compare your offerings to like how much the per minute cost of going to a movie, right? If like a movie ticket's like $15, you can sort of do the math, and then you can start comparing across, okay, the money value of time of going to a movie versus Disneyland. There's two different like price points there, and sort of where do you fit in if you're thinking about ways of doing that. So I just bring this up that experiences, and we'll come back to this at the back end too, but regardless if you are in an industry where the experience is the primary economic offering, right? So say you're in hospitality, or you could think about education as an experiential industry. That doesn't preclude you from engaging in the experience economy and thinking about what are the experiences that we are providing to both externally to customers and internally to employees, and that can drive brand loyalty, they can drive retention if we're thinking intentionally about how we design those experiences. And if you think about brands that you are connected to, there's often an experiential component to that relationship. Okay, so let me just talk in a little bit of specifics in terms of like what actually are experiences. This comes from Marcel Bastiaanse. He's a neuroscientist in the Netherlands. He's got an experience lab at the University of Breda. So they do all kinds of cool experience research. And from a neuroscience perspective, we experience life as a stream of consciousness. As I said before, like we pay attention to stuff, okay? But that constant inflow of information can be a little bit overwhelming. And so our brain breaks it down into experiential episodes based upon like models we have in our head. So for example, I wake up, I shower, I have breakfast, I drive to work. Our brain sort of segments what's happening based upon sort of how we usually experience the world. Every once in a while, we will have moments that sort of rise above the others, right? Because if I said, you know, what did you have for breakfast 14 days ago? Unless it was a special event or something strange happened, we don't remember, right? Our brain just sort of forgets those moments. But when we have a moment that evokes emotion, our brain timestamps that and we remember it. A memory is created. And that's sort of the starting point for extraordinary experiences, to kick something out of the ordinary and have it be remembered by the brain. So just think about, it's the stream of consciousness that we slice and dice, and some of those moments get pulled out and get stuck in our long-term memory a little bit more. And that's important for design principles, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. The other important thing to recognize is all experiences are co-created. So as I mentioned before, we're all here in the same room, right? We're having the same experience. These two individuals are here talking at the table. Objectively, this is the same. We're all having the same experience, right? But subjectively, we're each having our own unique experiences because we're unique people, right? You have different roles in your companies, why you're here today. You have had different things for breakfast. You are doing different things after this. You have there's all complexities that make people unique, and the stories we tell about the experiences we have are unique as well. And so as we design experiences for others, we really have to recognize that it's a co-creative process. Like, we have to understand where people are coming from, and we have to, if possible, involve them in the process, or at least be aware or try to be aware of their needs, right? Because we may think, oh, this is the greatest experience ever, and they're gonna see it completely differently. I really like yard work and like gardening. I think that's like leisure, and my dad thinks it's like forced manual labor, right? It's the same experience, two different perspectives. And at the core of it is that needs matter. Understanding people's needs is the secret sauce to experience design. If you understand what people's needs are, then you can design an experience to meet those needs. Okay, we'll have some Q&A time at the end, but any questions at this point before we jump into talking about design stuff? Okay, just shout at me if stuff comes up.
Is there a correlation or research done around when you're talking about extraordinary experiences that are memorable, goods that are the exact same goods will have a very different value, right? Like if you go on vacation, or my daughter's getting married.
Yeah.
I'm spending way more on flowers just because it's attached to a wedding, because the goods have a different value based on the experience.
Yeah. Oh, so there's super interesting research around like the goods that are tied to a memory, right? And also experiential versus material purchases, which I can give you some references afterwards, but like two great reads on this are Stuffication by James Wallman. It was like 2015. And the other one is Happy Money by Dunn and Norton. I can't remember their first names. Anyways, but I actually just read an article yesterday by a researcher at University of Texas where they're looking at how when you, let me see if I can phrase this right. I just read this yesterday. If you have an experiential purchase and you meet somebody else who has that same experiential purchase, it causes affinity or social connection with that other person. Like, oh, you've been there? You did that thing? Even if they have a more premium experiential purchase, right? You were like an economy and they were like first class, there's still like a social connection, which is not the case with material purchases. Because usually what happens if you meet somebody else with a material purchase, it's like, oh, you got the upgrade and I didn't, or my phone is this old and you have the new one. Like material purchases tend to like pull people apart, and experiential purchases causes connection. And even reflecting on experiential purchases leads people to want to seek out more social connection. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff in that space. Here's some other bonus content tied to the importance of needs. Two things that I'll just share here. This is a book called The Wonder Switch, really interesting book, more about sort of like curiosity and creativity. But the author makes the case that there's an important difference between types of curiosity, right? So he talks about this idea of counterfeit versus genuine curiosity. And we may say we're interested in our customers' needs, but unless we're actually doing the work to understand what their needs are and we really want to know, then it's counterfeit curiosity. And he frames this around his experience as a magician, right? So he was a professional magician in a previous career, and he said in the first part of his career, in the late 90s, early 2000s, people would just he'd do a trick and people would just be willing to be awed, right? Like, whoa, that's so cool. And he noticed over time, and he doesn't have data to back this up, this is just sort of his experience, but I think it's interesting. Over time, more and more people just wanted to know how he did the trick. It's like they'd be awed for a little bit and like, tell me how you did it. And he makes the case, this is sort of his hypothesis, that it was around about the time that people had more access to the internet, and that we just got, we have this expectation of just being able to Google things and find the answers, right? which is great if it's a simple problem, right? Like ChatGPT has changed my relationships with my kids when it comes to helping them with math, right? Before it was just getting angry, and now I'm like, well, let's just see what ChatGPT has to say about this. And like, I remember trigonometry, literally last night. Oh, I don't know where my slides went. Anyways, but if it's a more wicked problem, like we can't just Google stuff, right? We have to do the work of really understanding what's happening. We may go without slides here. Let's see if they come back. To go along with this, maybe my thing is just in someplace else. If anybody wants to come like, oh wait, no, look, I fixed it. There we go. It just decided. Here we go. We'll go over here. Thanks, though. We're good. Another one of my favorite researchers, Adam Grant. Has anybody read Think Again or Give and Take or any of his others? Think Again is my favorite. It's awesome. So this is from a study he did in 2011. For a long time, there's been research to show that there's a connection between intrinsic motivation and creativity, right? So this is one reason why some companies will say 10% of your week can be put towards passion projects, right? Because increases in autonomy are connected to intrinsic motivation, right? But the connection hasn't always been replicated in research. And so Grant wanted to see if there was another variable that influenced creativity. And him and his colleague, Barry, I can't remember their first name, looked at pro-social motivation and perspective taking. So when people were given opportunities to get to know the individuals that they were trying to solve a problem for, if they were given an opportunity to try to see the problem from that perspective, that moderated or increased the relationship between intrinsic motivation and creativity. Not only did it increase the relationship, but people tended to create things that were actually usable, right? Because they had spent time trying to understand the people's needs that they were solving it for. And not just from a sort of a functional, what's your problem so I can fix it, but had taken steps to really try to understand it from their perspective, right? And some of his other research that he talks about in Give and Take fits into this. They did research at college donation call centers, right? And divided people who were calling alumni to make donations. The one group just kept doing the work that they always were doing. The other group, they brought in scholarship recipients and had them talk about how the scholarship that they received impacted their lives and their education. And that group that had the line of sight were able to see how their work was impacting people were statistically way more productive in bringing in those funds, right? So when we're thinking about solving people's problems, if we can be curious, if we can try to understand what their needs are, it leads to creativity. I really think there's a connection between genuine curiosity, which leads to empathy, which leads to creativity, right? And you've got to have that to be able to design experiences. So let's talk a little bit about experience design. The first thing is to talk about experiences in terms of an experience scape, okay? So just like a landscape has certain elements, when we're landscaping, we've got maybe some hardscaping and water features and turf and bushes. Experiences have certain elements, sort of the raw materials of experiences, and there are 6 of those. I'm going to come back to that on the next slide. But let's just at this point say, okay, experience sort of exists in this experience scape, whether it's a digital or in real life experience. And we can also break experiences up into anticipation, participation, and reflection phases. And this is really, really important when it comes to extraordinary experiences because you have to account for all of those phases. A lot of times we just think about, okay, what's the face-to-face thing that's going to happen? The meeting or the talk or the sales call or people coming onto our website. We think about that moment, which is important, but we also have to recognize that things are happening leading up to that moment. And are we just letting people sort of find their way there, whether that's physically find their way there or emotionally or mentally Are we helping them? Are we paving a path that makes things easier? Are we helping them be giving them the knowledge or emotionally priming them the way we want them to? So when we actually have the experience, it can be as effective as possible. And we're also thinking about what happens after they leave the experience, because that's actually when stuff happens, right? Whether or not something is seen as memorable, meaningful, or transformational, that's determined after the experience is over. I mean, in the moment, you can have this like, oh, that was great, and then it can fade. And there's things that we can do to be more intentionally about that reflection phase. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But at this point, all experiences, anticipation, participation, reflection. For this conference, right, you got things in advance and you signed up for stuff, and all of those are these touch points along the way. Most of those touch points are ordinary, which is okay, right? Our brain has, attention is a limited resource, and throughout the day, it gets decreased. This is why it's hard to have good habits in the evening, because we're just sort of like, we're tired. We've used up our attention and our willpower, so to speak. So we have to design ordinary touch points, right? If it's hard to park someplace, if it's a struggle to log on to the website to buy the thing, touch points that should be ordinary suddenly become negatively memorable, right? And we don't want that. You may have had the experience of having a really great meal at a restaurant, and the food's great and the company's great, and you go and use the restroom and it's just a disaster, and that like sort of colors the rest of the experience, right? That's not even part of the restaurant experience technically, but it can ruin everything else. And so as an experience designer, we're thinking about, okay, what is, like, who are the people, what are their needs, and then how do I create an experience scape where they can go through the anticipation, participation, reflection phases and walk away telling a story about their experience that I would be glad to hear them tell, right? Because everybody's going to tell stories about the experiences that they have, whether or not we design the experience intentionally. But I think it's a good idea to think about how we can help them and how we can nudge them to tell stories that will be helpful and seen as positive for both parties. Because that's the real goal of experience design, is to design experience journeys where the stories told at the end are positive for both the participants and the provider in that experience. Let me go back to this idea of experience scape. So here's the 6 elements. And I think these do a pretty good job of accounting for the things that you are designing for and the raw materials that you're using with an experience. Let me just walk through these a little bit. So place, if it's a like in the physical world experience, it's going to be the place where that takes place, right? It's pretty straightforward. But also the sights and sounds and smells, all the sensory aspects of the place. If it's in a digital environment, it would be less sensory, right? But still where that experience occurs. It can also be the place and time, though, too. Something that happens in the morning is different in the evening, time of year. And with any of these elements, you change one and you change the whole experience, right? If this was the first session of the day, it's going to be different than the last session. If we were outside, it would be different than inside. So there's a lot that we can do with place. People, of course, you have to have people to make an experience happen. It's both the people who are participating in the experience, right? But also the people who are providing the experience, right? And they are going to have influence on what's happening. We've got to train the people who are providing. We have to prepare the people who are coming. It can also be the people who aren't even part of the experience, but are influencing how people think about the experience. So whatever's being talked about in social media or Google reviews, like those people are playing a role in what's happening. People are so important. We have another category, relationships. Those are the relationships between the people in the experience. Like, do they know each other coming in, if they're coming in as a group? If they're coming in as strangers, do you need to get them to know each other? Is that going to be important? Do you need to spend time doing that? You know, when I'm starting off a semester, like I spend time building a community of learners because they're going to get a lot farther along if they get to know each other early on. But if every time you went to the movies, if we all had to stand up and introduce ourselves before the previews, that would just sort of be weird. Or maybe not. I don't know. That could be like a new business opportunity. Social movies. Objects, these could be the physical objects, and not all, like there's stuff on the back row and some monitors and things. Those aren't super important in this room, but what are the salient objects? Also, like symbolic objects, like logos and things can be important. Rules are super important. We can do a lot of different things with rules and experiences, whether that's just social or cultural or organizational norms, all the way up to federal laws and regulations, right? Those all can influence experiences. And we can play with rules more than we think, right? You probably have gone to conferences like this, and maybe you've been to some where there was different rules, right? I went to this really funky conference in Poland called the College of Extraordinary Experiences, and cool speakers from IKEA and Google and Disney. It was very high profile people, and they made us like wear wizarding robes the whole time. It was really weird, but it changed the like whole social dynamics. It was really, I was like, oh, you can do this, okay. Rules, and you think about how much, we're just wrapping up like March Madness, like that, all of that, the billions of dollars that come out of that are all based upon like a set of rules, right? That James Naismith and others developed over time. Like rules are super important. And the last one is blocking. This is a theater term for any folks who are in theater. It's just the movement of people and things through space and time, right? So in theater, it's like if I have like blocking directions of like I come and I say this at this time and somebody wheels on this thing and then I go over here and I say this other thing. And experience is how we move people and things through our experience scape is super important, right? Many experiences end with poor blocking at the end, right? When you're stuck in a parking garage trying to get out, or you have to navigate some long way to get out, or whatever it might be. There's a great example, I think it was George Bush International Airport. They were having a lot of complaints about the wait time at the baggage pickup area, right? So internally, they were trying to come up with all of these solutions. Maybe we need different technology or better bag rollers, or I don't know, whatever that would involve, or make the bag pickup areas nicer, have TV, and maybe like more vending machines, or all things that like would cost a significant amount of money. The solution they settled upon was to just reroute planes, so on average, the amount of time it took to get to baggage claim increased, right? And all the complaints went away, right? Because it's not about wait time, it's about perceived wait time. And if you have something to do, right, while you're walking, then you aren't complaining about the bags because they're there when you get there, even though it took you like 10 minutes longer, right? So thinking about blocking, right? As you walked in this room, there were or in the building, there was signage, you knew where to check in and walk up, but this can go to websites, this can go wherever, think about blocking. So these are the elements, right? So we orchestrate these into an experience scape, and then people pay attention to it and walk away with their own subjective reactions, right? But we hope if we've done it right, that those reactions are one that they're gonna see as positive, and we will see as positive as well.
Where does technology fit in that now? Because so much of an experience now is technology, but that could be part of the place or the objects, or it could be in
Totally, great question. And most experiences are gonna be mixed, right? You're gonna interact with multiple different channels, you're gonna use the app to do this thing in the real world. And so, I mean, technology can like pop up in any of these spaces, right? It can be, like I was just at Disneyland with my kids last week, and they were using their magic bands in Galaxy's Edge, Star Wars place, to play this like scavenger hunt to find bounty hunters, right? And they had to use their technology to interact with a physical object to then go find these bounty hunters in a different place. And when we wanted to go on a physical ride, we had to use the Genie Plus app to reserve the lightning lane time. So the key, though, is, I think one of the keys with technology integration and across channels is that trying to have the experience be the same flavor across channels, right? Like, I think there's brands that do this really well, where you're like, when I'm on their website or on their app, or if they have a physical store, those experiences all seem the same. And other times it can feel like, yeah, like the way I'm treated in the store is different when I call I was talking about this with a group one time, and somebody said, yeah, I love to fly this airline, but I wish I could use this other airline's app to book tickets for this one airline because I don't like, so that's the goal, is to have that harmony across all those experiences. Since I'm talking about Disney now, Walt Disney said a lot of things about experiences and thought really intentionally about them. And one of them was that in paraphrasing, in an experience, everything speaks, and you want everything to speak in harmony, right? So this is why, and because I was at Disneyland last week, I'm thinking about this. If you're familiar with Disneyland, there's different lands, right? Adventureland, Tomorrowland. Each of those lands, Disney was really insistent that the elements in that land spoke in harmony, right? That's why there's not just standard garbage cans throughout the park. They're each thematically appropriate for the different land. He felt that the main way that people interacted with the park was through their feet. And so he wanted to make sure that there's different pavement in different parts of the park. So when you're in Adventureland, the pavement's different than Tomorrowland because you have that direction. So it's speaking in harmony. And if you're using technology, you want to have that be harmonious. I think I see with this, especially with undergraduate students, they always want to jump to like a website or an app solution. And I was talking with a technology startup that provided like app-based solutions. But the CEO was saying, when we have our initial conversations with clients, we don't talk about technology because people just want to like jump to like, well, will you build this app? They want to make sure that there's clear understanding of what the need is that they're addressing. And then the question that they ask is, what would you want your relationship to be with your customers if technology wasn't an option? Like, what would that look like so they could then glean sort of principles to then design the technology? Great question. Okay, 9 minutes. We'll wrap this up. The primary tool, many of you probably do this, and people will talk about experience mapping or journey mapping or service mapping. It's sort of all the same flavor, and these can become pretty complex because most experiences have feedback loops and multiple channels that people can go on. But just keeping it simple, we're thinking about what are the touch points in the experience that we are interested in designing, right? And for touch points, these can be, depends at the elevation that you're designing at, and maybe the full customer journey, right? And on average, we have customers for 6 years, right? Or maybe this one moment. So it's sort of deciding what elevation you're designing at. I usually like to think about like, what is the macro experience? So a lot of my experiences that I design take place over the course of a semester, right? So I think about the semester level, like what do we want to have happen in the semester? Then I'm thinking about sections, then I'm thinking about days, then I'm thinking about like moments within each class period, right? And we're also hopefully thinking about what are the touch points before, during, and after the experience. Then we're also thinking about what are the reactions that we want at each moment, right? And I really think it's helpful to say, exactly what you would want somebody to say or think in that moment. Not just like, good, but actually have a statement. Like, this is what you would ideally have somebody say in this moment, because that becomes your design target. Like, what are you going to do when people walk in the room or log on the website so they say the thing that you want them to say? Not manipulatively, right? But you're nudging them. You're thinking about, how do we make everything like harmonize around that reaction? And then we're thinking about, okay, so who and what are the contributors? What people, what things do we need to make this particular touch point happen, right? So this is like a super simple example of like a sales call. These would be the touch points of the call. This is what we want people to say, and these are the people who are involved, right? It can be as simple as this with touch points or like sticky notes up on a board. Like, I'm always amazed when I do my own experience mapping or working with a group that it does a couple of things. It really brings clarity to what exactly it is that we're doing. Invariably, especially if this is an experience that crosses multiple units of an organization, you'll have orphan touch points where people will be like, well, who does this thing, right? And it also is a really powerful way to gather empathy data from your customers, right? Because if you may say something like, tell us about your experience with our product. and they'll tell you stuff. But if you give them an experience map and say, this is our perception of what the customer experience looks like. How does this match with your experience? Are we missing things? Are there other touch points? And it provides this framework to have a conversation about what's happening. So you can use it both as an evaluative tool to design or redesign an existing experience, or you can use it to design a future state experience. It can also be a really powerful training tool because you can't tell, if we're thinking about experiences where there is some face-to-face interaction, you can't train people for every single conceivable issue that's going to happen. But if they know in general, I own this touch point and this is the reaction that we're trying to get, and it provides them autonomy to be a little bit more creative in solving that, right? Again, sorry, too many Disney references. It's just on my mind because I was there. I just know when I'm at the park, right, there, it's the happiest place on earth. So that's their goal, right? While they charge me like $10 for Dole Whip. And I'm going to be happy about it because it's hot and it's delicious, that they're going to figure things out. So at one point, we were just about to get on to Space Mountain. We'd been waiting a while, and one of my kids like has to go to the bathroom, and it can like not wait, right? And we're like right about there. But I knew that we could take him, get out of the line, go take care of him, come back, find somebody and be like, this is the situation, what can you do? And they would like work it out, right? And we ended up still like finding each other as we split up and took care of kids like back at the beginning of the line, because they were gonna, it's the happiest place on earth. They're gonna help figure something out. So as simple as this may seem, just starting to pick an experience that you are either want to make better or in charge of. This could be a weekly meeting. This could be really anything. This could be like family dinner. And just start thinking about like, what are those touch points? And usually the way that I slice and dice touch points are when you're asking people to pay attention to something else, right? That can be a nice way. But if you find yourself having 95... That was like a long one. That was good. Okay, I'll look at that later. If you're having like 80 touch points in an hour, that's too many, right? I usually think about like 10 to 15 per hour, but it based upon the experience. And I've got some resources at the end that I'm going to share with you, some templates and things that you can use. Okay, so we talked about experience design process, phases: anticipation, participation, reflection, experience mapping. The next point, and I've got a couple of videos that there's a QR code at the end because we're not going to talk about touch point design. But once you have those touch points identified, then you can go into each touch point and say, okay, how are we thinking about these 6 elements, right? These are our raw materials. How are we orchestrating these in this moment to get people to react in the way we want them to? Okay, I'm going to go really fast. Trying to tie this back to ordinary or extraordinary experiences. So in both practice and in the research literature, the terms memorable, meaningful, and transformational are thrown around a lot and not often well defined, right? Like, what is the difference between a memorable and meaningful experience? If you really care and you want to deliver extraordinary experiences, I think it's really important to be able to define them. And so in 2018, we published this framework and have subsequently doing some research that I'll share with it in terms of measurement. But the basic idea here is that ordinary experiences require attention, as we talked about at the beginning. Memorable experiences occur when there's emotion, and emotion creates a memory, right? So they require attention and emotion. Meaningful experiences occur as we reflect on our experience, reflect on these memories, and extract insights from them, right? Meaningful, like relevant insights. And then the experience becomes meaningful. So it builds upon each other, right? So you need attention, memory, and insight. And then as those insights, if they become integrated in how we see the world or our attitudes or our identity and influence our behavior, change our behavior, we can think about that as transformational. So there's this hierarchy that builds upon each other. And it's really hard, I think almost impossible, to design in the moment transformational experiences. I think those only happen like a couple of times in our lives. But over time, something that was memorable can become meaningful and transformational over time. But it all happens in a more temporal way than just in the moment, right? This is why the reflection piece is so important. If you're giving people emotions in the moment of the experience, what are you doing down the road to nudge them to reflect, to help them see how it's relevant, et cetera, et cetera? And what's cool with this is we begin measuring this. We have a couple of different tools to measure this. This goes against sort of what I was saying about the temporal nature, because you can still ask people in the moment. They may feel in the moment, yeah, like this changed me. Whether or not that sustains over time, that's a question, right? But the data in the moment is interesting. So what we've done here, this isn't the greatest figure, but in a couple of different studies, we collect data so we can sort of classify people's perception of the experience in ordinary, memorable, meaningful, and transformational. Then we also match that against their NPS scores from the experience. And this comes out of like 3 sort of pilot studies. We're still working with this. But what's cool is there's statistical differences between people say, no, I didn't experience any emotion, insight, or change in that. And those who said they experienced either emotion or insight. So these are the memorable, meaningful. And then there's another statistically significant difference between those that experience emotion, insight, and change. And what's cool with this is, you get NPS and you can dig into the qualitative data, and that can be helpful. But it doesn't necessarily tell you what are ways to increase brand affinity. And it doesn't need to be monumental change. It could be small t transformation. But what way are you inviting people to change or have opportunities to change? This is sort of like off on a more temporal basis. I'm not going to worry about that. Let's just quickly go back to Dr. John Snow. So he questioned assumptions. He went out and talked to people. I mean, people are dying, and he's in their homes trying to understand, where do you get your water, and who were you in contact with before this happened? Did lots of field interviews, data visualization. This took years to sort of change people's perceptions of what happened. But in the end, it changed public health. And really, it was the beginning of the founding of epidemiology, when he was able to show, no, this is a waterborne disease. And this is one of his maps, where he would go and map where people were dying. And it all centered around this pump here on Broad Street, that people were getting their water from here. Even if they're farther away, they're like, oh, we always walk here. There's a woman in Hampstead who would send her servants here to the Broad Street pump because it tasted better. And then she died. And they're like, but he was able to trace it all back here. I take students on study abroad, and I've done a number of semesters in London. So this is a group of students here at the Broad Street pump, talking about collaboration and curiosity. Right here, you can't see, is the John Snow pub. There's a pub right here by the pump. But as I said, if you want to design experiences, you've got to be curious about those that you're working with, what their needs are. And field work is really, really essential. And data visualization, like experience mapping, can be really, really powerful to take this abstract idea and have a visual representation of what it is that you're trying to design. If you want to know more about Dr. John Snow, this is a great book, The Ghost Map by Stephen Johnson. We talked about some of these things. I've got some resources here, a couple of videos and some other resources there if you want to check out. And I'm done. I have to stick around and answer some questions, but I know we're a little bit over time, and there's probably other things happening. But thanks for your time.